Hey everyone, Barry Rager here. This is part 2 of a 3-part series titled Steelhead Patterns. Now I robbed the term patterns from professional bass anglers because at the beginning of their tournaments they'll rush out to their spots and they'll try to figure out what bait works on that particular day. Well, I do the same thing when I'm steelhead fishing. Now when I get to a new run, I always start with jigs. Now I covered that in part 1. I'll put the link above if you want to watch that first. But the reason I start with jigs is because they're the least intrusive. They're less likely to spook the fish in that holding water than some of these other methods. But if I've effectively covered that water with a jig, I'm going to switch to beads second. Beads are a little bit more intrusive because you have the weighting system that's bouncing down the river and that's right where the fish are and that can spook them. Part 3, I'll do spinners, but that's later on down the road. Now the rod I use for bead fishing is a G.Loomis E6X. This is the 1163. It's a 9.5 foot spinning rod. It's rated 6 to 12 pound test. I have it paired up with a Shimano 2500 series reel, and I'm running Power Pro Super Slick 30 pound test on here. Now I'll explain the rigging in detail. So the rigging may seem a little convoluted, but for the most part I only have to tie one of these rigs up once a day. Yeah, the leaders will get lost and or they'll get damaged when you cook a fish, but the actual main portion of the rigging I generally only have to do one time a day. Now to start out with, I tie on a bumper. I use anywhere from 12 to 15 pound CXX for a bumper material, but what I do is I just keep some leaders that are pre-cut in some little bags so that I have easy access to them on the river. So right here, this is 10 foot of P-line CXX 12 pound test, and this is going to be my bumper. The reason I use a mono bumper is because it has a little bit of stretch to it, and P-line CXX is extremely strong. I start by tying my leader on with an Alberto knot. And if you don't know how to tie an Alberto knot, I actually have a video on my channel explaining it a little bit further in detail. I like it. I think it's the strongest splice knot for what I do. It's super small diameter, so it goes through your guide super easy. So once you've tied that on with the Alberto knot, cut off your tag ends. And there you have it, your Alberto knot. So I always start out by installing 2 Dacron bobber stops at the top of my leader. And the reason I do 2 is I generally only have to do one of these riggings a day, and these can get worn down. Sometimes they'll fall off. That way I don't have to manually put on another one. And 2 also creates just a little bit more friction on the line, and it prevents your bobber from sliding up. So slide that tube over the line, pull the bobber stop off, tighten that up. So that's 1. And 2. Next, I put on a small bright yellow bead. They come with arrow floats. I like the bright yellow bead because it's super visible, because this is going to go above my float. Feed that on there. Now this is the float I would recommend. I've tried a bunch of different floats. These are the ones I really like. They're weighted, they help with casting, and I think they ride better in the water. This is the Aerofloat AF6. This is an 1/8 ounce, but if the water's a little bigger, you might want to use a 1/4 ounce. But again, Aerofloat by Hawken AF6. It's a weighted slip float. So thread that on next. Then I put on another bead. And this one I'm just going to use a little see-through red bead. Now the next step that I like to do, these little rubber bobber stops, I put one under the second bead, and if you don't know how these work, these rubber bobber stops have a little metal wire through them with a little loop. So you put your leader through that metal loop, and then you just pull straight up on that rubber bobber stop and it pulls it onto your line like that. So the reason I put that rubber bobber stop on is twofold. One of which is if you get your terminal gear, like your weighting system, hung up and you end up breaking that off, you might just save your bobber. Two, that kind of helps you fix that float a little bit further from your weight, so when you cast in, your weight can fall and the bobber doesn't have as far to travel to get to the bobber stops up above. So you'll get to the fishing depth quicker. So next, I tie on a snap swivel. This is a number 7 Roscoe snap swivel. You want to tie your leader to the end of the barrel swivel that's attached to the snap swivel. So I'm going to tie that on with an improved trilene knot. Five wraps. Always wet your knot. So what I like for a weighting system is a slinky. Now I make them myself. This is a 3 Magnum shot slinky. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put that on the snap portion of this swivel. Put that on. So here's what we have. We have our weighting system, which is attached to a number 7 snap barrel swivel. We've got our rubber bobber stop, bead, AF6 float, second bead, and our Dacron bobber stops. Trim off just a little bit of the Dacron. You want to leave probably about 3/4, ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch on those. And just like so. So that's the initial rigging right there. I pre-tie my leaders in these pips boxes. It's very handy. I have 10-pound test P-line salmon steelhead fluorocarbon to a size 2 Bloodrun Skeena hook. I pre-installed the BNR rubber T-stops on these rigs. Now you can, if there's a certain bead that you like to use, you can pre-install them on here, but I like to be able to choose which bead I put on when I'm on the river. Pull that out. Now for purposes today, I'm going to use one of my favorite soft beads. It's a BNR red 10mm. My office, it's a little dark, but you feed that through the bead onto that T-stop. So now that it's on that T-stop, you want to peg these about 1.5 inches above the hook. And the reason being is that when steelhead suck these in, you don't want this hook to get down in their gills, especially if you're fishing a river that's primarily a native run. So you want to peg those 1.5 inches to 2 inches above, so when they grab that bead, the hook isn't down in their gills. You feel that bite, or they feel that resistance and they take off, it pulls through, and 9 times out of 10 it gets them right in the corner of the mouth. The magic leader length that I have found is 30 inches. So what I've done is these leaders I've tied them to 42 inches, pre-tied them. On the leader, I've made a Sharpie mark at 30 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that Sharpie mark right up to the end of the barrel swivel here. Tie that on with an improved trilene knot. Trim off your tag end. So this is the system that I use when I'm fishing beads. You want to set the depth of your bobber stop to the river depth or slightly deeper. So now I'm going to show you a clip where I successfully hook and land a steelhead utilizing this bead rig I just showed you. And I'm going to break it down as we go. So you can see here I've got my 1163 E6X rigged up just the way I explained it to you. I should mention I've already fished jigs in this section of water without any luck. Just like with jig fishing, you want an uninterrupted float with that bobber. So you can see I've got my arm high. I'm mending that line as needed. You'll see me sweep my rod tip because when my bail is open, that allows the line to come off of the spool a little bit easier. And right about now, I have a bobber down. You just have to sweep that rod, tighten your line, and those little Skeena hooks just dig in. You don't even really have to set the hook. You just tighten it up. So while I'm fighting the fish, I'll just explain something about the float and the way you want it to look when it's floating down the river. Unlike a jig float that you want to be perfectly perpendicular or slightly pointing upstream, when you're bobber fishing with beads, it's kind of opposite. You want it to be kind of pointed downstream. And what that's telling you is that your weighting system is touching the bottom. You don't want it too far over. You want it almost like at a 45-degree angle. It seems like when it's at that angle is when I generally have the strikes. That means it's just tapping along the bottom as it goes. And this is just a beautiful native buck steelhead. You can see the adipose fin just in front of my right hand. Hatchery fish, that will be a heeled fin clip right there. And there it goes. Beautiful fish. Now if you like the video, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell. I put out a new video every Friday during the fishing season at 6 p.m. And I say during the fishing season because I also hunt as well. So September, October, November, I'll be a little bit busy. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment field. I'll get back to you. And if I've earned it, hit the like button. So I'll see you on part 3.